And as you all know, there are three kinds of media. The first, we call in America earned media. I'm not sure you use that term here, but earned media simply means the newspaper story, the TV news, the op-ed, the opinion piece, the editorial that you don't have to pay for, but you have to earn it. You have to do something to get that. You get that media. And every step of the way, we made full use of that media to get the message out to the public about the fact that alcohol taxes save lives and the fact that there's broad popular support. A couple of important things about earned media. One is have a good message and repeat it 1,000,000 times and hammer it through. What is our message? Alcohol taxes save lives. I would be criticized by some people saying, didn't you say that about 20 times in that press conference? I said, only 20? I meant to say 40 times. Because the more you say it, the more likely it is that it's going to get in that newspaper. Whenever they ask me a question, what about people going across the border? No, that won't happen for these reasons. And by the way, alcohol taxes save lives. That's what our study shows. And it worked. Every time anybody quoted me, that phrase was in there. They couldn't avoid it. I was on TV shows where above my head it said, alcohol taxes save lives. That's what we wanted. So that's our basic message. And kind of a sub-message is alcohol taxes increases are good policy and good politics. And not only going to save lives, but it's also going to make sure that you get reelected, because the people of Maryland want to vote for someone who supports an alcohol tax increase. So number one, good message. Number two, good messengers. Have people speak about your program who have respect in the community, who have clout. And for us, it was people like the head of the Maryland NAACP, who had a lot of support in our state and some key faith leaders. Very, very important to have them speaking. I understand that the Salvation Army is a very well-respected entity in New Zealand. I would go to them quickly to get them signed on and do a press conference with the head of the Salvation Army if they're supported. But groups like that, get them out there. And second, within that, is really encourage these folks to tell their story from the heart. Some of my colleagues will script out people who are going to speak word for word. I have never done that. Sometimes I regret it, but most of the time it really works to bring out their message. When we're working on a tobacco tax increase, one a minister said that for years his two 20-year-old sons had smoked, and his wife and he had tried to stop them from smoking, and they couldn't get them to stop. The cigarette tax increase stopped them from smoking and saved their lives. That was a powerful message. And we actually turned that into an opinion piece, which ran in our local paper. So it's really important to have good messengers who will say things like that, and you've briefed them so they know the issue, but they will also speak from the heart. And related to all that, build good relationships with these reporters. Reporters and media people, they're human. They like people who will talk with them, go out to lunch with them, become friends, and be there when they need you. So that's earned media, very, very important. Second is paid media. We're a small nonprofit. We don't have a lot of money. But what I have found is that the best way to put the money we had was radio. In the Baltimore area, a lot of people listen to the radio. We got our message out. And a lot of times when we did good ads, which was often, the earned media would pick it up. So in addition to the people who heard it themselves on the radio station, people would read about our radio ads or see it on TV, a description of it. So paid media is very important. Third is social media. You've got to keep up with the times and do the Facebook and Twitter. I have to admit, I don't do any of that. I don't know anything about Facebook and Twitter over my family and friends and colleagues' objections. I just too old and decrepit. But I have colleagues who are big time into it. We have at Healthy Maryland a Twitter handle, and we have a Facebook Healthy Maryland Initiative or Maryland Citizen Health Initiative where you can hear all about us. We just got enacted in Maryland one of the first law in the country to try to do something about escalating prescription drug prices, and that just went into effect on October 1, whenever that was in America. But on October 1, that took effect, and it was all over our social media. You can see that. So you got to keep up with, especially the young people, and be on social media. So the media is a very, very important way to take your message to the broader public. So we had done steps 1, 2, 3, and 4, and by the time we got to this point, we had really started to change the dynamic in Maryland. More and more people were talking about the fact that alcohol taxes save lives. No matter how you use the money, it's going to reduce underage drinking and alcohol abuse. And politicians were starting to think, oh my God, this is something I better be for, because it looks like the public really wants this to happen, and that's what they're going to vote on. But we still wanted to do more. We still had this powerful vested interest opposition to what we're doing, and I believed that the only way to really overcome that was to make it an election issue. So we had an election. We have elections in Maryland every 4 years. And all of our representatives in what is called, our parliament is called the General Assembly. Everybody in the General Assembly is up, as well as the governor. And what we did was we sent to all of the people running for re-election a document we wanted them to sign, which was the same almost as the document all these organizations signed, except that instead of saying, we the undersigned organization endorse an alcohol tax, it's I, the undersigned candidate for whatever office, endorse this. This is very, very important, because putting that document into their hands makes them have to make a decision, and you give them a deadline. You say, by this point, you need to tell us, are you for an alcohol tax to save lives, or are you not? And if you don't respond, you're not going to be on the list we're going to put out to the public, because we're going to let the public know who supports and who doesn't. And because we did our job so well, many of them started thinking, maybe I better sign this, even though they had never wanted to sign before an alcohol tax. And we descended upon them during this time with our coalition. Our coalition members who we had built over the years suddenly descended on the candidates, so everywhere they went, they heard, are you for the alcohol tax? Did you sign that resolution? One way to think about it is if you think of yourself trying to lobby or talk with one of your legislators in your parliament when they're in parliament session. What are you to them? You're another pain in the neck, right? They're trying to avoid you. They're trying to go to their hearing, whatever it is. Yeah, whatever you say. But in election time, you're very important to them, right? They need your vote. They want your support. So when you say at election time, you better support that alcohol tax resolution, it's going to resonate, I believe, a lot more. Now, we've been working with this process since 1994, every election cycle. And I'll never forget the first time we did this in 1994 was on a measure to reduce gun violence. We sent out that document for candidates, and one came back signed by this candidate who I really wanted to have signed it, and I was thrilled, and we let the public know that he signed it, and he called me very upset. How dare you say I support this? And I said, well, I got your signed document. He called me back, and I faxed it to him. He called me back and said, oh my God, my secretary signed that without telling me and sent it to you. I said, well, you want me to hold a press conference taking your name off the list? No, don't do that. Okay. So we got the better end of that deal. But what we found since then, that because of our public pressure, these candidates and these incumbent legislators were signing this, even if they weren't really people who love alcohol taxes. I'll give you one example. In the city of Baltimore, where I live, there was this one state senator named George Della, who basically hated my guts. He hated all the issues I worked on, and he was upset about the alcohol and tobacco tax increases. And when he was running for election, we sent out that resolution, and he got it. Luckily for us, there was a young man running against him named Bill Ferguson, who is now the state senator, who signed right away our resolution. A few days later, I got his signed resolution, George Dell. I was sure it was another mistake from the secretary. But what I found out was he had a meeting of his staff. He said something like, I hate that DeMarco and I hate alcohol taxes, but I better sign this or I'm going to lose. What that showed us is that the power of our coalition and our campaign was such that even someone who didn't really like alcohol taxes knew he had to be for it for political reasons. And that is what we wanted, that they all thought alcohol taxes are good policy and good politics. Well, luckily for us, he signed it and lost, so that we had a really good guy, Bill Ferguson, who supports us, who's now the state senator from there. But what this shows you is the power of this process. And after we succeeded in getting these candidates to sign, as I said, we put out a list of all those who supported the resolution. And we actively held press conferences and urged our coalition partners to put that out through their networks so that as many Marylanders as possible knew who supported an alcohol tax and who didn't. Because remember, our poll taught us that if voters know that, they will tend to support a candidate who supports an alcohol tax. But it's very hard to get voters to know that, right? Because there's so much going on during elections, so much input to the voters, but we got through with our message. And many of the candidates for office were so energized by our campaign that they ran on the issue. I'm for the alcohol tax to save our kids. My opponent is a tool of the alcohol lobby. That became the message in many of these campaigns. And as a result, a General Assembly was elected with a majority already in support of the alcohol tax, which was a tremendous difference from just 2 years before, when the word in Annapolis was no way will an alcohol tax pass. And that's because we did these 6 steps in an effective way, culminating in that election process. Now, I want to emphasize we never endorsed candidates, never opposed candidates. What we did was demand that they endorse us and simply let the people of Maryland know who endorsed and who hadn't. Now, you may be asking, during all this, steps 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, where's your vaunted opposition? Where were the powerful alcohol lobbyists and the tobacco lobbyists who were able to block the alcohol tax for 40 years? Well, I want to say that some of the alcohol lobbyists are my friends. I like these folks. But with all due respect, I will compare them to cockroaches. And the reason is that they do well in the dark, right? What happens if you're in a dorm room, as I was, with a lot of cockroaches? You'll turn the lights on and they flee. When nobody's watching in our General Assembly, in your Parliament, they're in charge, right? Nobody's watching. They have a lot of clout. But we turned the lights on and they scattered. There were no press conferences by the alcohol industry saying more kids should drink, right? There were no press conferences by the tobacco companies saying tobacco is good. We had the field virtually to ourselves. That's very, very important. Now, one time the tobacco companies tried to fight back and they funded a group that would oppose us. You know the term grassroots organization? Is that a term here? Yeah, that's what we are. We're a grassroots organization. I called them AstroTurf organization. Fake. And they were completely funded by the tobacco lobby, but they had all these attempts to undermine us publicly and all the rest. Well, we went to the media and told the media that these folks were around and where they got this money. So the front page of the Sun was about how a tobacco funded organization is trying to destroy this tobacco tax. So their one attempt to go public really failed. The one thing the reporter wanted to know from me, which I didn't want to tell him, but I did, was my salary. Who wants your salary highlighted in the newspaper? But it turns out that the opponent was making $450,000 a year in 1999, which was a lot of money, and I made like a small percentage of that. So that was part of the David versus Goliath message. So their attempt to undermine us publicly worked to our benefit. My point is, a campaign like this is something that's playing on our field, not theirs. This is not the inside game that they're so good at. This is the outside game where we bring the public to bear. So after step 5, we are in a really good position where we never were before. Going into step 6 of the General Assembly session in 2011, it was no longer a question of, are we going to pass an alcohol tax, with the answer being no. The question was, is there going to be an alcohol tax? Not how much is it going to be? No longer a question of whether, but how much, which was much better, which is what we had accomplished with steps 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. But our battle wasn't over yet. The alcohol lobby was still very powerful. And we were back on their turf in a way, on our state capital. But we had changed it. We had made it much more amenable to us by making the discussion about how much an alcohol tax was going to happen. All these people who are now legislators had signed on to be for the alcohol tax. So they had to pass an alcohol tax. What the alcohol industry worked on doing was making it as low as possible. We wanted the alcohol tax increase in Maryland to be a dime a drink. They said, oh, how about 1 or 2 cents? Way too low. We knew dime a drink was not going to happen, but we wanted something substantial, around 5 cents a drink or something that would really reduce underage drinking. 1 or 2 cents was not going to be good enough for us. But they were pushing back very, very hard. So we had to do several things to keep the message going. Number one, continue to use the media. Continue to get the opinion pieces, the editorials, the press conferences. Have that continuing. Continue the grassroots. Continue getting calls and letters to legislators from the people in their districts, especially the key legislators, about how they need to support this. And have a really good hearing. Have a hearing before the committees where you do 2 things. Number one, make the case as clearly and forcefully as possible that alcohol taxes save lives. Have your version of our Professor David Jernigan testify about how definitive the evidence is. If you pass this, you will save lives. Make that clear to the legislature. And make clear the breadth of your coalition. Have people testify who will show how all across the state people support this. Have those people there in the room for the legislators to see. Now, there's a balancing act there. You don't want to have too many people, because then they get annoyed at you boring them and all the rest. And I had to balance that all the time, because everybody wanted to testify. And I'll never forget, we had, on one of our major hearings, 7 or 8 of the top faith leaders in Maryland. And I said to each of them, no more than 2 minutes, please. You try to say that to faith leaders. It was not working. They were all going on and on. Every word was beautiful, but the legislators were getting really sick of it. The last person on that panel was from the Baltimore Jewish Council, who had the best testimony I've ever heard in my life. Me too, from the Jew. That was it. And he got a standing ovation. But the fact is, what his testimony said is that the Jewish community of Maryland supports this, and that's the message we want. So we accomplished what we needed with our hearing. As we went forward, 2 things happened which were very important on the alcohol tax. One involved where the money goes. So it was going to be clear we were going to get an alcohol tax. But we wanted the money from that tax to go to public health purposes. Alcohol and drug treatment and prevention, and help people with developmental disabilities and mental health, and into health care. The legislature needed money desperately for school construction for 1 year. So we were told that the money, if we're going to get an alcohol tax, the money was going to go for 1 year into school construction and then back into the general fund. We had to make a very important decision. Were we going to keep fighting for this alcohol tax, or were we going to say, we don't want it anymore? If we had said the latter, it would have died. It would not have passed. So our coalition came together, and I really implored people to stick with the alcohol tax for 2 reasons. One, it's going to reduce underage drinking and alcohol abuse no matter where the money goes. And number 2, once the money's back into the general fund, we can fight to get that money into our public health goals. Luckily, we decided to do that. And ultimately, the money did go to all our public health goals. But it was very, very important for our coalition to stick together, even though there were members of our coalition who said, we should just reject it now because of that the change of where the money goes in the first year. Luckily, that did not prevail, and we prevailed in keeping with the legislation. Secondly, we had a very fascinating change happen in the kind of tax it was. We originally wanted an excise tax on alcohol, which is the basic way alcohol is taxed. I had no idea that there was any other way to tax alcohol. And as I said, one of the main arguments they were using against us is that if you enact this, people are going to go across the border to another jurisdiction. The District of Columbia, where Washington, our capital, is right next to Maryland. And for 20 years or so, our excise tax on alcohol was the same as theirs, very low in both jurisdictions. And we were told over and over again, if Maryland does this big increase in the alcohol excise tax, people near D.C. are just going to go there to buy their alcohol. And that was having an impact on the legislators, which is why we were facing a possibility of a 1 or 2 cent increase and not a 5 cent or 6 cent increase that we thought we needed as a compromise from our proposed 10. Luckily for us, in the middle of all this, it became known that the District of Columbia, in addition to its excise tax, had a separate sales tax on alcohol. So Maryland and District of Columbia both have a 6% sales tax on most products. In D.C., they had an additional 3% tax on alcohol. Nobody knew about that. And we were all shocked. Even our experts didn't know about that. I remember talking to my friend in the alcohol lobby, and I said, so you say you didn't know about this. Were you lying or are you stupid? He said, we're stupid. Everybody claimed to be stupid. It was fine. But nobody knew about this. The legislative leadership jumped on this and said, okay, we need to pass an alcohol tax. You guys say we can't be higher than D.C. We'll go to where D.C. is. And we had to decide again, do we accept that? And we had to think about the difference between a sales tax increase and an excise tax increase. From a public health standpoint, the negative of a sales tax increase is that it doesn't have as big as impact on lower cost alcohol like beer, right? It has a bigger impact on higher cost alcohol, wine, and spirits. That's the downside. The plus side is an excise tax is static. It doesn't go up with inflation. Sales tax, by definition, goes up with the cost of the product. And we decided that's worth it. And also, our experts told us that a 3% increase in the alcohol sales tax would be like a 5-cent a drink excise tax increase, which was about what we thought was going to happen. And as we've talked about, it did have a dramatic increase in reducing underage drinking and drunk driving in Maryland. And we liked the fact that it would go up with inflation. So we went along with it. And it looked like it was on its track to pass as this new 3% sales tax increase with the money going, as I said, into school construction and then back in the general fund. And then at the last minute, the alcohol lobby decided to fight it tooth and nail. And they went all out to defeat it. And we had one of the most exciting moments in our General Assembly history that I remember. On the last day of the session, and our sessions end at midnight of a certain day. It's called sine die, without day. That's it. Everything's dead at midnight, 0.01. So at about 4 or 5, our bill came to the floor of the House, and the opposition decided to talk it to death by everybody who was opposed to it getting 2 minutes to explain their votes. And under the rules, anybody can explain their votes for 2 minutes. And we have in our lower house, the General Assembly, about 141 members. About 50 or 60 were diehard opponents. Each of them was going to take 2 minutes. And that, in the last few hours, added up to a couple hours. It looked like we were definitely going to lose. One of my colleagues said, we definitely lost this. And I stuck my hand out and bet him $5 million that we would win. He still hasn't paid me. But the reason we won, and this goes back to the importance of that study, the Speaker of the House talked to the parliamentarian and concluded that even though under the rules everybody can explain their vote for 2 minutes, because they were doing it in concert, it was delaying tactics. So under Mason's rules of order, he could rule them out of order, which he did. The place broke up in pandemonium, but the alcohol tax passed. But it's another example of how the fact that that study got our speaker engaged in the issue, in the end, helped us to win. So we got the alcohol tax through. 3 lessons for after something like an alcohol tax passes. Number 1, work on implementation. We had to make sure that the alcohol tax money was used for our purposes we wanted, and we did, and that took a lot of work. You can't just stop after your law passes. Second, make sure you say thank you. Like reporters, legislators, and parliamentarians are people too. They like the handshake thank you, the letter. We made sure every one of them that voted yes got a letter, thank you very much. We held press conferences with them to really highlight how supportive they were. And third, we've done this sometimes. If someone does something really bad, hold them accountable for what they do. Make sure you do these things after the session. But most importantly, let me leave you with this. If you're going to work on this issue, night and day, say the words, alcohol taxes save lives, constantly. And number 2, come up with a plan that includes these 6 steps, and I think you'll succeed.